August 15th, 1944. The northern cliffs of Saipan Island. The smell of cordite and death hung thick in the tropical air. Major Yoshiro Sakamoto of the Imperial Japanese Army sat in a muddy shell crater, hands bound with American rope. Around him lay the scattered debris of battle, shredded uniforms, empty ammunition boxes, and the bodies of his men. He had commanded over 800 soldiers 3 weeks ago. Now only 17 remained alive. An American Marine tossed a cigarette pack onto the ground beside him. Sakamoto watched as the Marine lit a cigarette with a small metal device, then carelessly threw the lighter aside, like garbage. Something about that gesture made Sakamoto's hands tremble. He picked up the discarded lighter. It was chrome-plated, perfectly machined, with a small hinge that opened smoothly despite the mud. The words Zippo Manufacturing Company, Bradford, Pennsylvania, were stamped on the bottom. The American had thrown it away, just thrown it away. Major Sakamoto began to weep. The Marine interpreter asked what was wrong. Through tears, Sakamoto whispered words that would be recorded in his interrogation file. If your soldiers discard such precision, what do they keep? We are not fighting men. We are fighting gods. This is the story of how a $1.50 lighter revealed the truth that doomed the Japanese Empire. For 3 years, the soldiers of Imperial Japan had been told a comfortable lie. American soldiers were soft. They were undisciplined. They came from a nation of jazz music and Hollywood movies, a culture that produced nothing of value. They would break easily under the spiritual strength and warrior discipline of the Japanese fighting man. This was the official narrative taught in every military academy, from Tokyo to Manchuria. Japanese officers studied at schools where they learned that Bushido, the way of the warrior, was superior to Western materialism. They trained with rifles passed down through family lines. They carried swords forged by master craftsmen, blades that took months to create, weapons inherited from fathers and grandfathers. Major Sakamoto himself carried a katana that had been in his family for 5 generations. The sword was 140 years old. His great-great-grandfather had carried it during the Boshin War. It was a sacred object, irreplaceable, maintained with religious devotion. This was what the Japanese military understood: quality over quantity, tradition over innovation, spirit over material. But by 1944, that understanding was crumbling. The Battle of Saipan began on June 15, 1944. 30,000 Japanese defenders faced 70,000 American attackers. The Japanese had been told they would win through superior fighting spirit. They had been told American soldiers would flee at the first sign of serious resistance. Instead, they witnessed something that defied every assumption they held. Wave after wave of landing craft. Hundreds of them. Thousands of Marines pouring onto the beaches under a storm of naval gunfire that made the earth shake. The bombardment alone used more artillery shells in one day than the entire Japanese garrison possessed for the entire campaign. And the equipment. Dear God, the equipment. Every American soldier seemed to carry more gear than a Japanese officer. New rifles, new boots, new uniforms, watches, canteens, flashlights, knives, tools, medical supplies, all of it pristine, all of it mass-produced, all of it apparently disposable. Major Sakamoto had watched through his binoculars as American soldiers ate from tin cans and threw the cans away. Cans of meat, cans of fruit, cans of vegetables. His own men were rationing rice balls and trying to catch rainwater. The Americans threw away more food in a day than his unit consumed in a week, but nothing prepared him for the moment he held that Zippo lighter in his hands. The Zippo Manufacturing Company of Bradford, Pennsylvania, had been producing pocket lighters since 1932. By 1944, the company had shifted almost entirely to military production. They manufactured lighters for the United States Armed Forces at a rate of thousands per day. The design was simple, but brilliant. A brass case with a hinged lid, a striker wheel made of hardened steel, a cotton wick fed by lighter fluid stored in a felt pad reservoir. The whole mechanism sealed tight enough to work in rain, wind, or mud. Each lighter cost the U.S. military $1.50. Soldiers could buy them at the post exchange for $2. Most GIs owned 2 or 3. Some owned a dozen. They engraved them. They decorated them. They traded them. They lost them. They threw them away and bought new ones. To Major Sakamoto, holding that discarded Zippo was like holding a miracle. The machining precision was extraordinary. The hinge mechanism alone required tolerances measured in thousandths of an inch. The striker wheel was perfectly knurled. The spring mechanism never failed. This was engineering that matched or exceeded anything in his ancestral sword, compressed into a device the size of a matchbox. And Americans made millions of them. Millions. His sword had taken a master craftsman 3 months to forge. One sword. 3 months. The blade had been folded and hammered thousands of times. It was a work of art, a sacred object, something to be treasured across generations. The Americans mass-produced precision lighters faster than Japan could manufacture rifle bolts. In his interrogation, Sakamoto spoke for 3 hours about that lighter. The American intelligence officers initially thought he was mentally unstable. Then they realized what they were hearing. This was the sound of a man's worldview shattering. Lieutenant Hiroshi Tanaka was also captured on Saipan. His interrogation file contained similar observations, but focused on different objects. Tanaka had found an abandoned American foxhole. Inside were items left behind during a rapid advance. A half-empty carton of Chesterfield cigarettes, a pocket knife, a wristwatch with a broken strap, 3 chocolate bars, a paperback book, and a pair of sunglasses. The Japanese lieutenant sat in that foxhole for 20 minutes, examining each item. The pocket knife was a standard-issue Marine K-bar. 7-inch blade, leather handle, steel pommel. It was sharp enough to shave with. Tanaka owned a knife his father had given him. It was 30 years old, carefully maintained, resharpened dozens of times. The American knife was brand new, factory fresh, probably issued within the last month, and the American had left it behind like trash. The wristwatch was even more revealing. It was a Hamilton military watch, standard issue for U.S. forces. 17 jewel movement, waterproof case, luminous dial. Tanaka had never owned a wristwatch. Only officers of rank could afford such luxuries in the Japanese military, and even then, they were prized possessions maintained with obsessive care. This American watch was broken. The strap had snapped, so the soldier had simply left it behind. Presumably, he would requisition another one, or buy one, or receive one in a care package from home. The abundance was incomprehensible, but it was the chocolate bars that broke Tanaka's spirit. He opened one and ate it. He had not tasted chocolate in 2 years. The sweetness was overwhelming. He began to cry, not from joy, but from despair. The Americans fed their soldiers chocolate, casual chocolate, disposable chocolate. 3 bars left behind without a second thought. Meanwhile, Japanese soldiers were eating tree bark and considering it a good day if they found edible roots. Tanaka wrote in his diary that night, "We are fighting an enemy that treats luxuries as garbage. How can we possibly win?" The intelligence officers of the U.S. Marine Corps quickly realized they had stumbled onto something significant. As more Japanese prisoners were processed, the same themes emerged again and again. The captured soldiers were not primarily shocked by American firepower or tactics. They were shocked by American abundance. Captain James Mitchell of Marine Intelligence began conducting systematic interviews. He wanted to understand this psychological breaking point. What he discovered was a coherent pattern that repeated across dozens of prisoners. The Japanese military had prepared its soldiers for combat. They had trained them to face death with honor. They had drilled into them the expectation of hardship and sacrifice. What they had not prepared them for was facing an enemy that did not seem to be at war at all. One prisoner, Sergeant Kenji Matsumoto, described watching American soldiers on the beach. They were taking a break between assaults. Some were reading magazines. Others were playing cards. Several were listening to a portable radio. One Marine was shaving with hot water heated over a small stove. Matsumoto's unit had not had soap in 6 months. They had not received mail in 8 months. Their rations had been reduced to 1 meal per day. Many suffered from dysentery, malaria, and malnutrition. They fought in the same uniforms they had worn for months, rotting in the tropical humidity. And the Americans were shaving with hot water. In that moment, Matsumoto told Captain Mitchell, I understood we had already lost the war. It was not a matter of courage or will. It was a matter of math. They had so much, and we had so little. The statistics bore this out in brutal clarity. In 1944, the United States produced more steel than Japan, Germany, and Italy combined. American factories manufactured 40,000 tanks that year. Japan produced 4,000. The United States built 96,000 aircraft. Japan built 28,000. American shipyards launched ships faster than submarines could sink them. But these were abstract numbers, statistics that meant little to soldiers in combat. What meant everything was the physical evidence in front of their eyes. Major Sakamoto examined that Zippo lighter with the eye of an engineer. He noted the precision of the threading on the fuel chamber. He observed the clever design of the wind guard. He tested the striker mechanism dozens of times, and it never failed. He examined the chrome plating, which showed no signs of wear despite obvious rough use. This was not crude mass production. This was precision engineering at scale. The Americans had somehow achieved both quantity and quality simultaneously. It seemed impossible. But the evidence sat in his palm, weighing less than 2 ounces. In the prisoner camp, word of the lighter spread quickly. Other Japanese officers asked to see it. They passed it around like a religious relic. Some wept. Others grew angry. A few laughed bitterly. Colonel Takashi Watanabe, the highest-ranking Japanese officer captured at Saipan, held the lighter for a long time. He was 53 years old, a veteran of campaigns in China and the Philippines. He had believed absolutely in Japanese victory. He had sent thousands of men to their deaths with complete confidence in the righteousness of their cause. Now he sat in a prisoner of war camp, turning a disposable American lighter over in his hands. Do you know what this means? He asked the other prisoners. This means we never had a chance. Not at Pearl Harbor. Not at Midway. Not ever. We were fighting the future with the past. Captain Mitchell's intelligence reports began to circulate at higher command levels. The psychological impact of American material superiority was proving to be a more effective weapon than anyone had anticipated. General Holland Smith, commander of the Saipan operation, read the reports with interest. He ordered that certain items be deliberately left visible in areas where Japanese soldiers might observe them, not as bait for traps, but as psychological warfare. Let them see the abundance. Let them understand the futility of resistance. Abandoned supply dumps were left partially intact, cases of rations stacked high, ammunition in quantities that seemed obscene, fuel drums by the hundreds, medical supplies enough to stock a hospital, clothing, boots, tools, all the material of modern war, and more than any Japanese unit could dream of possessing. The effect was devastating to Japanese morale. Private Takeshi Yamamoto surrendered on August 3, 1944. He was 19 years old and had been in combat for 8 weeks. When asked why he surrendered, he did not speak of fear or wounds or hunger, though he suffered from all three. Instead, he spoke of walking past an American garbage dump. I saw them throw away boots, he said. Perfectly good boots. The soles were barely worn. In my unit, we would fight each other for those boots. We would kill for them, and the Americans threw them in the trash because they had a small tear in the leather. He paused, struggling to find words for what he felt. They threw away, in one day, what we could not produce in a month. How do you fight that? How do you beat an enemy that is careless with treasure? The interrogators noted that Yamamoto was calm, rational, and cooperative. He was not broken by combat. He was broken by comprehension. Back in the prisoner enclosure, Major Sakamoto still carried that Zippo lighter. The Americans let him keep it. They found his attachment to it more sad than threatening. What harm could come from a lighter? But Sakamoto wasn't keeping it as a souvenir. He was keeping it as evidence. He was a trained officer, educated in strategy and logistics. Before the war, he had studied engineering. He understood manufacturing processes. He knew what that lighter represented. Every night, he took the lighter apart and reassembled it. He studied each component. The case was stamped from sheet brass in a single operation. The hinge was automated assembly. The striker wheel was mass-produced to identical specifications. The cotton batting was precisely cut. Even the decorative knurling on the exterior was applied by machine, thousands of units per hour. He did calculations in his head. If America could produce this level of precision engineering for a disposable lighter, what could they produce for weapons, for aircraft, for ships? The numbers were staggering. The implications were apocalyptic. Japan's entire industrial capacity could not match what America devoted to non-essential items. The luxury goods alone, the disposable products, the casual abundance exceeded Japan's total war production. Sakamoto wrote a letter to his wife, knowing it would be censored, but hoping some version might reach her. In it, he tried to explain what he had learned. We were told America was weak and soft. We were told their soldiers had no spirit. We were wrong about everything. They are not weak. They are so strong they can afford to waste strength. They are not soft. They are so hard they can afford to be comfortable. We thought our willingness to die gave us advantage. But you cannot defeat an enemy who does not need to sacrifice. You cannot beat an enemy who wages war without suffering. The letter never reached Japan, but it remained in his file, a testament to the moment understanding replaced propaganda. Lieutenant Tanaka, who had found the American foxhole with its casual treasures, began conducting his own informal study. He interviewed other prisoners, asking them what moment made them realize Japan would lose. The answers varied in detail, but were identical in theme. One soldier spoke of captured American medical supplies, morphine in such quantities that medics carried multiple doses, sulfa powder to prevent infection, bandages that were clean and sterile, surgical instruments in portable kits. The Japanese Medical Corps had virtually no supplies at all. Wounded men died from infections that American medics could prevent with a single dose of penicillin. Another soldier spoke of boots. American combat boots were leather, reinforced, comfortable, and replaced regularly. Japanese soldiers wore canvas and rubber shoes that fell apart in weeks. Many fought barefoot. The Americans had better footwear for their soldiers than Japanese officers could obtain for themselves. A third spoke of communications equipment. Every American platoon had radios, multiple radios, portable radios that worked reliably in any weather. The Japanese relied on runners and signal flags. Their radio equipment was scarce, heavy, unreliable, and frequently non-functional. But the most damning testimony came from Warrant Officer Masao Hayashi, a logistics specialist who had spent the entire war managing supply lines. He understood better than most how wars were actually won and lost. Ammunition, he said to Tanaka. Let me tell you about ammunition. Hayashi explained that the average Japanese infantryman was issued 60 rounds of ammunition, 60 rounds total for the entire Saipan campaign. They were ordered to make every shot count. Fire discipline was absolute. Waste a bullet and face punishment. American soldiers carried hundreds of rounds per man. They had machine guns that fired hundreds of rounds per minute. They called in artillery support that expended thousands of shells for single targets. They had ammunition in such quantities that they could afford suppressive fire, a concept that did not exist in Japanese tactical doctrine because it required ammunition abundance. They could miss 99 times and still kill you on the 100th shot, Hayashi said. We had to hit with the first bullet because we might not get a second. That is not a fight. That is mathematics. We lost the war before it started. Lost it in the factories. Lost it in the mines. Lost it in the fundamental capacity to produce material. He paused, then added, "That lighter your major carries. It is a symbol, a perfect symbol. They make precision throwaway items. We make precious heirlooms. In modern war, precision throwaways beat heirlooms every time." The psychological impact of these realizations spread beyond the prisoner camps. As the war continued and more Japanese soldiers surrendered or were captured, they carried with them stories of American abundance. These stories filtered back to Japanese lines through various means: released prisoners, propaganda leaflets, even observations from holdout positions. The effect on morale was catastrophic. Soldiers who might have fought to the death for emperor and country found their resolve crumbling when faced with evidence of such overwhelming material disparity. It was one thing to die gloriously in hopeless battle. It was another to die uselessly against an enemy that treated war like an industrial process with unlimited resources. On Saipan, after organized resistance ended, American forces found numerous caches of captured American equipment. Japanese soldiers had been hoarding items taken from dead Marines or abandoned positions. But these were not military supplies. They were personal items: lighters, pens, watches, pocket knives, can openers, eating utensils, sewing kits. The Japanese soldiers had been collecting evidence of American abundance, trying to understand the enemy they faced. Each item was a data point in a calculation that led to one inescapable conclusion: we cannot win. Major Sakamoto was eventually transferred to a prisoner of war camp in Hawaii. He spent the remainder of the war there, working on agricultural details and teaching English to other prisoners. He still carried that Zippo lighter. Other prisoners asked him why he kept it. His answer was always the same: to remember the moment I understood the truth. To honor that moment. It saved my life because it made me surrender instead of dying uselessly in a banzai charge. This lighter is worth more than my family sword. The sword represents a past that is dead. The lighter represents a future I did not understand. After the war ended in August 1945, Sakamoto was repatriated to Japan. He returned to a country that was devastated, burned, starving, and occupied by the very Americans whose abundance had so shocked him on Saipan. He watched American occupation forces distribute food to civilians. He watched them rebuild infrastructure. He saw American vehicles, American machinery, American goods flooding into Japan. The abundance had not been a battlefield mirage. It was real. It was everywhere. It was the new reality of the world. Sakamoto kept that Zippo lighter until his death in 1973. In his final years, he worked as a consultant for Japanese manufacturing companies that we were studying American production methods. He was part of the generation that transformed Japan from a defeated empire into an economic powerhouse. When asked about his wartime experiences, he rarely spoke of combat. Instead, he spoke of lessons learned, the importance of industrial capacity, the necessity of efficient mass production, the understanding that modern nations compete not just in military valor, but in economic might. I learned more from that lighter than from 4 years of military service, he said in a 1968 interview. It taught me that wars are won in factories before they are fought on battlefields. It taught me that the future belongs to those who can combine quality with quantity. It taught me that we must never again mistake tradition for strength or ritual for capability. The Zippo lighter itself was donated to a military museum in Tokyo after Sakamoto's death. It sits in a small display case with a placard explaining its significance. Thousands of visitors see it every year. Most walk past without understanding. Some stop and read the story. A few, mostly older veterans, stand before it in silence, remembering their own moments of realization. Lieutenant Tanaka survived the war as well. He became a teacher in Osaka, specializing in modern history. He wrote extensively about the psychological aspects of Japan's defeat, focusing on the disconnect between propaganda and reality. In his writings, he returned again and again to those items in the American foxhole: the chocolate bars, the paperback book, the disposable sunglasses. These were not military necessities. They were comforts, luxuries, the casual benefits of a wealthy society at war. "We sent our soldiers to die with honor," Tanaka wrote. "America sent their soldiers to live with comfort." Both approaches reflected our societies. Both approaches reflected our industrial capacities. Both approaches determined the outcome. We could produce warriors. They could produce everything else. The broader legacy of this phenomenon extended far beyond individual stories. American military intelligence recognized the psychological impact of material superiority and weaponized it deliberately. In subsequent Pacific campaigns, efforts were made to ensure that Japanese forces could observe American supply operations. Airdrops were conducted in view of enemy positions. Supply depots were established in conspicuous locations. The message was clear: we have so much that we can afford to show you what you can never have. This psychological warfare proved highly effective. Surrender rates increased in later campaigns. Banzai charges became less frequent. The fanatical resistance that characterized early Pacific battles gradually gave way to a more pragmatic calculation of survival versus pointless death. Post-war studies conducted by both American and Japanese military historians identified material abundance as a critical factor in breaking Japanese military morale. While combat effectiveness, tactical superiority, and strategic decisions all played crucial roles, the sheer visible evidence of American industrial might created a psychological pressure that was impossible to resist. Japan's post-war economic miracle was directly influenced by these lessons. The nation that had treasured handcrafted swords and seen them rendered obsolete by mass-produced lighters became a world leader in efficient mass production. Companies like Toyota, Sony, and Honda built their success on combining the precision of traditional Japanese craftsmanship with the efficiency of American industrial methods. The irony was not lost on surviving veterans like Sakamoto and Tanaka. They had fought to preserve a traditional empire. They had been defeated by modern industrial democracy. And in defeat, their nation had learned to excel at the very things that had beaten them. Today, if you visit the Saipan battlefield, you can still find artifacts from that terrible summer of 1944: rusted weapons, shattered bunkers, the bones of the fallen. And occasionally, if you are lucky or unlucky depending on your perspective, you might find a Zippo lighter in the mud. Corroded by decades of tropical weather, but still recognizable. Still a testament to American manufacturing. Still a symbol of the moment when Japanese soldiers realized they were fighting a war they could never win. Major Yoshiro Sakamoto's story became well known in Japan in the decades after the war. His realization in that shell crater, triggered by a disposable lighter, represented a larger truth about the Pacific War. Spirit could not defeat steel. Tradition could not overcome production. Honor could not manufacture ammunition. The soldiers of Imperial Japan were brave. They were disciplined. They were willing to die. But bravery is not enough when facing an enemy that can afford to miss. Discipline is not enough when facing an enemy that never runs out of supplies. Willingness to die is not enough when facing an enemy that can keep its soldiers alive and comfortable. That is the lesson of the Zippo lighter. That is the lesson Major Sakamoto carried with him for the rest of his life. That is the lesson that changed Japan and, in some ways, changed the world. If you found this story fascinating, there are hundreds more untold stories from World War II waiting to be discovered. Stories of ordinary objects that revealed extraordinary truths. Stories of soldiers on all sides coming to terms with realities that shattered their assumptions. Stories that remind us how wars are really won and lost. Subscribe to ensure you never miss these remarkable accounts of courage, sacrifice, and the moments when everything changes.